good afternoon, wherever you're coming from. Maybe it's a good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anita Desai. I'm the Executive Director of St. Lawrence Society of Canada. And before we get too far in, I just want to note that we are recording today's session and it's going to be made available on our organization's YouTube channel sometime shortly after the event today. So if you are mindful of that and you want to, maintain your privacy, you're welcome to change your name, switch off your video screen, whatever makes you comfortable. And then, yeah, so Danielle Corey, who's with us today, she's going to be managing that. And if you have any other issues, you can write to her directly or in the group chat, and we'll help you if you need some support to navigate maintaining your privacy. Um, I'll just get us really, started quickly with the acknowledgement that SLSC is located in Ottawa on the traditional unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and that our 10 member organizations of our national network are located on various traditional unceded lands across the country, as are many of you who are located who are gathering alongside us today from places that are home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So thank you for being with us today. I hope you take opportunity throughout your days to reflect on the space where you live and how you can impact change and reconciliation for Indigenous peoples in your communities. So, a little bit about SLSC in case you're not familiar. I know some of you have joined our previous webinars, but I will, for those of you who are coming for the first time, just mention that SLSC is a national membership-based organization that brings together a network of individuals and organizations to collectively address the needs of justice-involved people. And we really do this from beginning with supportive housing. We work together to advocate for safer, healthier, and more inclusive communities. Our purpose is to promote humane and informed criminal and social justice policy, practice, and responsible leadership to foster safer communities. So that's a little bit about us. I encourage you to visit our website if you want to learn more, but we are hoping that you are here today because you know a little bit about us and what we do. And today, our webinar that we're hosting is the third in our new Community Connections webinar series, which will occur monthly until next summer. The series is really about promoting public education to advance our purpose, and each session features guest speakers who will explore what's working, what's possible, and what still needs to change on key social and criminal justice issues. We've tried to ground that this year in those issues that are particularly relevant to the federal framework to reduce recidivism. So today we are joined by my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Erin Dej and Dr. Jessica Braimoh. Erin is joining us as an associate professor at the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University. And Jessica Braimoh is joining us as assistant professor, Department of Social Science at York University. And they are going to share insights from their partnership with our organization and with St. Lawrence Canada and the National Youth Justice Network on our project, which was called Pursuing Justice. So I'm going to just hand it directly over to them and note that for the first time in a while, we actually have plenty of time. We're always crunched into these 15-minute presentations at different conferences or in different meetings. And so I'm really hoping that I get an opportunity to have Erin and Jessica really open up space for conversation, to share a lot about what we've done, to not feel rushed. And I'm not going to time card you guys. But I think we have an opportunity today to really open up a conversation about the work that we did. So I'm going to pass it over to Erin and Jess. But Erin, maybe you can go ahead and introduce yourself first. And Jess, and I will run your slides for you. Just let me know when you need to move them over, and I'll get them up when you guys are ready.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anita.
Pleasure.
Just wanting to recognize Anita's leadership in this work. And so she's taking a step back today because this is her organization putting on the webinar, but want to highlight that Anita is the reason that all this happened and that the report is as comprehensive and as true to community as it is. So just want to give a really big shout out to Anita, and hopefully you'll jump in the Q&A and get to be part of these conversations today. You can put up the slides if you'd like. I am coming to you. I'm a professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, so I'm coming to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chontan peoples. And Jessica's going to talk a little bit about how we all, as a research team, kept in mind what it means to try to reshape the intersection of youth homelessness and youth criminal justice involvement through an anti-oppression and Indigenous rights lens. So I'm so excited to get to share with you today the work that we've been doing for the last 2 years. It was a labor of love in many ways and a true passion to want to shed light on that intersection between youth justice and youth homelessness. Earlier this year, we were able to put out our final report and a series of, smaller infographics about the solutions that we've identified, as well as pathways for change makers. So you have that QR code there that you can scan to access our material. And I'm sure that St. Leonard's is going to send it out at the end of all this as well. So we aren't going to rush through it, as Anita says, but we won't be able to cover everything in this presentation. So we're just wanting you to know that all those resources are there for you. Next slide, please, Anita. So what I hope to do with you folks today is go over the project and what we did, so you have an understanding of how we came to the solutions that we did. Jessica is going to walk you through, in particular, the guiding principles and how we orient this work and the solutions. And then we're going to share with you the 14 solutions grounded in 3 sort of buckets, and then provide a spotlight on 3 of those solutions to really drill down on what we mean when we talk about pathways for change makers. That's a little understanding of what we're about today. Next slide. It is Jessica and I presenting this, but as I've already mentioned, there was a whole team behind us that I want to acknowledge and appreciate. Again, Anita was a lead project coordinator of this work, and so a huge shout out to Anita. We also worked with young people with lived experience of youth criminal justice involvement and youth homelessness. So from across the 4 regions where we did this research. So want to thank wholeheartedly Neo, Fialka, and Ethan for all that they provided for us. So they attended the focus groups and the roundtables. They helped us with our putting it together with our analysis. And so this work is truly guided by the people that are most touched by those sectors. We also had regional coordinators, which also could not have been done without this work. So we had key actors in the 4 regions that we did this work who were able to tap us into the right people to be able to be a part of this. So we were hearing from a diverse range of voices across the sectors to ensure that we were able to capture the complexity and the nuance of what these intersecting systems look like. So big thank you to the regional coordinators, as well as our research assistants, who anybody who's done a research project knows that it's the RAs that make the whole thing happen in a real way. So big thank you to them. Next slide. So this work really came out of conversations that the National Youth Justice Network had been having for a few years before I arrived on the scene, and recognizing they were recognizing how important the youth homelessness piece is to the work that they're doing from coast to coast to coast on youth justice. And so this is where I was able to tap into that group, the National Youth Justice Network, and talk about what it means for there to be an intersection, really an often unrecognized intersection between youth justice and youth homelessness. And so Anita and I were talking, and this kind of grew and grew. And our goals were in part quite humble. Again, being able to name and acknowledge and have conversations like we'll have today, that we can actually talk about this usually unspoken connection between youth justice and youth homelessness, but also to do so through a solutions-oriented framework. It's very easy and cathartic to vent and complain about all of the challenges that we see, but we wanted to make sure that with this work, we were doing something with it and being able to point to real solutions. So across Canada, young people are being released from custody into homelessness, while other young people are being criminalized simply for surviving without housing. these aren't isolated issues. These are symptoms of what are disconnected systems, often inflexible policies, and missed opportunities where we identified solutions that we think that we can make a change. So the goal of pursuing the Justice Project was to improve our understanding of how the youth justice system can reduce young people being discharged into homelessness, and then vice versa, how the youth homelessness sector can support rapid, sustainable exits from homelessness to prevent young people from being involved in the justice system. Next slide, and I will turn it over to Jess.
Thanks, Erin. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did in this project. So between April 2023 and March 2024, we conducted 3 main phases, which, again, as Erin has briefly mentioned, were covering 4 broad regions. So British Columbia, the Prairies, Ontario, and the Atlantic. And so phase 1 of this project, which is indicated on this slide at the very, very bottom, was the survey. So in the summer, fall of 2023, we did an online survey that was distributed across these 4 regions. And this was really meant to inform the first kind of questions and kind of queries that we were interested in about the interactions between youth justice and youth homelessness systems. We were interested in the impact of these experiences and the responses to youth involvement across these 2 sectors. So you see here on the slide that 73 people completed this initial survey. The second phase, so this is our roundtable 1, took place in winter of 2023, and these were half-day virtual roundtables that took place in each of the 4 regions to address some of the main problems that were being kind of flagged, if you will, in those survey findings, and as well that were kind of guiding our initial research questions. So we were having these conversations in each of the 4 regions in this second phase. Phase 3, so this was in spring of 2024, again using the similar half-day virtual roundtable format. This was focused, again, in each of the 4 different regions, but the focus here was on a solutioning exercise. So trying to think about the strategic problem areas that were identified in the first set of roundtables and what we might do about this. And so that's really what was guiding what happened in roundtable 2. And so you can see here, roundtable 1, 69 people were kind of involved in that. Key there was to identify these central problem areas. And then in roundtables 2, we were thinking about how we might solution or come up with strategies to reduce some of these areas of concern. Last step, of course, there was our final report and the 14 solutions that kind of center that last part of the project. Next slide, please. So based on the survey and roundtables 1, we identified 3 strategic problem areas. So you'll see this here on the slide. The first one, service eligibility and access. Really, this was about there being too many young people who were falling through the cracks because they were either too old or too young, or they didn't meet the eligibility criteria for accessing service. And so we know there are numerous policies and practices that prevent youth with justice involvement from accessing housing and support services. And some of the biggest concerns were eligibility criteria, right? This criteria were seen as completely arbitrary. They were using age definitions that didn't quite match or fit with what young people were experiencing. There were requirements for stable, kind of numerous policies that we're saying things around income or ID requirements that didn't, of course, match onto young people's experiences, things around mandated school attendance, or other barriers due to probation or no contact orders, right? And this made it really hard then to address some of the housing needs that young people were having. The second problem strategic area was around policy and funding alignment. So we know that youth need stability, but right now, funding for these services is often fragmented, short-term, and tied up in red tape. So we know we have these separate funding mechanisms and policies for youth justice and housing services, which make it very difficult for there to be a unified approach to responding to youth homelessness. And so these kind of siloed funding models really contribute to the lack of coordination between services. And this, of course, impedes the ability to provide this seamless support of young people moving across or out of the youth justice system into independent living, right? As well as to kind of support young people in accessing housing supports to avoid criminal justice involvement. The last strategic problem area here, number 3, coordinating service delivery and engagement. So it's interesting when you start to think about, again, roundtable 1 in the survey, participants were noting that young people shouldn't need a case manager to figure out where they need to go for help, but that's kind of where we're at, right? There's needs to be this central role of trying to navigate this system. And there are limited opportunities and mechanisms to coordinate transition for youth connected to both child welfare, criminal justice systems. And this is also the case for joint initiatives between homelessness, housing, and justice sectors, right? We see similar kinds of issues there. And so this siloing and fragmentation within and across government departments and their related social systems, as well as the nonprofit sector, contribute to these poor outcomes for young people, right? There needing to be someone to help facilitate their access to these supports. So policies and barriers within social systems disproportionately impact youth being discharged from both youth justice and child welfare systems, and subsequently leave young people vulnerable to homelessness. And as a result, young people might disengage if their needs are not being met. It's just too hard, right, to figure out what and how to access the things that they need. And this can include things like cultural disconnection, need for stimulation due to developmental stage, need to build life skills, desire for independence and control. There was a lot of different dynamics that we were hearing as a result here, as a reason why young people might disengage, right? Peer influence, feeling unsafe. The reasons were kind of endless. Next slide, please. So as we were kind of working our way towards solutioning, again, that was that was in the second set of roundtables, participants identified that change within and a collaboration between the youth homelessness and youth justice sectors needed to be grounded in key unwavering principles that inform policy programs, interventions, and advocacy. And so the 14 solutions that we identified, our participants were really strongly held to this notion that this could not be done without an active engagement with the following principles. And this needed to be happening continuously, right? This was not a kind of one and done. This was something that needed to be happening all the time. So what I want to do is kind of walk us through these different guiding principles. Again, highlighting that our participants were very clear that these principles need to be actionable, not aspirational. This is not something we just say and we move on. There was an active attempt to try to integrate these principles into the actual solutions and the pathways that we identified for change makers. So the first one, decolonize systems and practices. So using a decolonizing approach means undoing the harms of colonial settler influence on equity-deserving populations, including Indigenous peoples, while also actively working towards reconciliation to create a society that upholds the rights of all people. In terms of upholding housing as a human right, we know and we recognize that everyone in Canada deserves safe, affordable, and adequate housing, including young people involved in the youth justice system. Assuring the right to housing will allow for the bi-directional relationship between homelessness and justice involvement to be reduced. Number 3 here, if you can see on the slide, do not expand the criminal justice system. Right, so we're thinking about the kind of expansion of the carceral net and how we might be able to reduce that. And we know that policies and legislations aimed at combating homelessness may inadvertently perpetuate criminalization. And so there's an active attempt with this guiding principle to undo that, right? So in an effort to provide resources, it's important not to expand this carceral net and further criminalize young people. When designing housing or implementing new programs, allocating funding even, the issue of recriminalization and further criminalization needs to be considered. How does the introduction of this new eligibility requirement or this new program facilitate possibly the recriminalization of young people, right? Or facilitate perhaps people's entry into more precarious housing? Like having that actual consideration is something that folks were thinking about. So for another concrete example, program policies or group or family homes need to evaluate when police are called to settle disputes, what other solutions or resolution strategies might be used in kind of opposition to that, so that we're not literally putting police, criminal justice kind of system in tandem with these young people. Number 4 there, if we're kind of following our way through the circle here, mitigating interlocking forms of oppression. So all of the solutions that we came up with through this project were developed with an anti-oppressive lens. And this includes considering how programs and policies are experienced by Black, racialized, Indigenous youth, 2S LGBTQ, 2+ IA youth, young women, gender diverse youth, youth with disabilities, youth from equity deserving groups. And we need to be mindful that mitigating oppression also looks like integrating ways that can enhance culture and community for young people experiencing inequities, right? And making space and opportunities that are experienced as open, welcoming, safe for youth. Last one here, youth voice guides the work. And I think even thinking about how the advisory group participated in this is another reminder of how that really shaped our thinking about these solutions. But here we're thinking about that effective change cannot occur without the input from the people who are most impacted by these policies and programs. So developing youth partnerships, right, is crucial to the sustainability and the effectiveness of new initiatives that are trying to break this interconnectionness between homelessness and justice involvement. And this can, be something that is diverse. It can be kind of a myriad ways that young people become involved, whether it's hiring young people as consultants on projects or creating youth advisory groups, maybe having governance boards, engaging young people in ways that make sense for them and the realities of their lives, I think is also something to keep in mind. And so these principles, as they were being developed again through this project, were not meant to be these abstract ideals, these things that, we say we're going to do, but to actually actively think about how each solution is designed, implemented, and even evaluated with these things in mind. Next slide, please. So in the interest of time, we're going to talk about, we're going to do like a spotlight, if you will, on one of the solutions from each of the 3 strategic problem areas. Of course, if there's questions and things that we want to go back to afterwards, we're absolutely welcome to do that. Erin mentioned at the beginning the QR code that was on the beginning set of our slides. I'm sure that Anita will send out this information as well afterwards. But just so everyone knows, we're just going to kind of spotlight one solution from each. And so as a high-level overview, it's important to note that we found that the solutions kind of coming out of this project were consistent with the literature that highlights this bidirectional relationship between youth homelessness and youth justice system involvement. And I think that's interesting to kind of remind ourselves, right, that there is an extensive body of literature that's kind of showing similar kinds of things. Not surprisingly, the challenges for youth involved in both systems are interconnected, right? And they stem from structural inequities, system failures, power imbalances that directly lead to the marginalization and discrimination of young people in Canada. We added, and you'll see this in the slides coming, a discussion about the explicit solutions, and then a discussion about pathways that changemakers could actually take to materialize some of these solutions. And so again, you'll see that there's different sets of actors who are named as these changemakers. And just like the problem is interconnected, I would say that the ways that we address some of these problems through these solutions is to involve multiple actors simultaneously in taking up this work. So it's not just reserved for municipal governments, or it's not just reserved for the government of Canada. Everyone needs to be playing a role in addressing some of these issues. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the first strategic problem area around service eligibility and access. So as you can see on the slide, we've italicized number 1, and this is the kind of spotlight that I'm going to do on this one. So here the solution is to establish more mechanisms to enable early and comprehensive discharge planning from youth justice. And so we know that young people leaving the justice system need early, person-centered discharge plans that map out real supports, right? From housing and healthcare to education, community connections. And they need all of these upfront to ensure stable, successful transitions. But without reliable, age-appropriate services that are consistent, we have the situation of leaving many people at a continued risk of homelessness. And so I wanted to kind of highlight how this particular solution fits in with some of the guiding principles. We know that this solution, having more mechanisms to enable early and comprehensive discharge planning, aligns with the principle of not expanding the criminal justice system or the carceral net. Right? This principle, again, is emphasizing the need to avoid deepening or expanding the role of the justice system. So discharge or planning discharges happen early before release. This solution prevents youth from being discharged into homelessness, reducing their risk of recidivism, the system's overuse, right? Expanding the kind of opportunities for new punitive interventions. It kind of helps to alleviate that. Discharge planning also helps secure stable housing before youth leave custody, preventing homelessness and ensuring that housing is in fact treated and responded to as a fundamental right. And it materializes that in actual practice. Rather than treating housing as this temporary or conditional benefit, we start to coordinate, for example, social assistance and community housing programs. Youth are less likely to be discharged into precarious and unsafe living situations, thereby upholding this notion that housing is in fact a fundamental right. Continuing on this spotlight, can you go to the next slide? You will see we have the different pathways that different change makers, so Government of Canada, provincial and territorial government, municipal governments, and community-based agencies might be able to take to realize or actualize this solution. It is a summary of the different pathways in the larger document. It's a bit more kind of expanded out, if you will. So I'm going to talk a little bit about generally what all of these are saying, and then I'll walk us through what each one is suggesting. So when you think about all the different pathways for this particular solution, really what it's calling for is a sort of justice to community transition system that's early, it's consistent, it's fully supporting discharge planning that's guaranteed, right, for every young person, regardless of their custody status. We're kind of urging change makers, governments, community agencies to coordinate their policies, their resources, and their accountability mechanisms, right? We need to know what's working, what's not working, how it's happening, so that when youth leave the justice system with real housing options, they are connected to supports, they have a clear and actionable plan that sets them up for stability, right? Rather than homelessness. When we think about the government of Canada explicitly, here are the specific pathways to extend the YCJA reintegration requirements so that all young people, including those in pretrial detention, receive discharge planning and coordinated support. Again, you can start to see how some of these guiding principles are materialized even in these pathways. Housing is a human right, don't expand the carceral net, like it all becomes very visualized here. For provincial and territorial governments, we're trying, just as like a kind of summary here, to extend access to young people's housing allowance while they're in custody so they don't lose their home simply because they're detained, right? That seems like a pretty clear-cut way to prevent young people from entering into homelessness, right? We need to have more youth-specific transitional housing with wraparound supports designed for the realities of justice-involved young people. We need to think about how provinces and territories might partner with municipalities to fund community reintegration programs and sort of bridge this gap between custody and community, right? Municipal governments, again, thinking about how they might establish priority housing wait lists for homeless youth, ensuring that they aren't competing with adults for these kind of scarce resources, particularly in some communities over others. We see that scarcity is a bit more visible. And then finally, for community-based agencies, again, thinking about this collaborative work that could happen, right? These collaborative policies that might allow shelters to reserve beds for young people who are released from custody. So again, that no young person is leaving justice with nowhere to go. Thinking about community-centered accountability mechanisms, again, drawing on that guiding principle of involving young people, right? And a way that young people could be involved in that. And then these joint advocacy across agencies and sectors is critical, right? That this would allow there to be a unified voice to municipal, provincial, and territorial, and the federal governments to secure policies and funding required to make safe, supportive reintegration a reality for young people. Next slide, and I'll pass it over to Erin.
That was a perfect segue, Jessica. We didn't even plan that, but as you talked about funding and policy alignment, here we go. So I'm going to share with you a bit about the next two strategic problem areas and the solutions that came from it. So the second here is that funding and policy alignment, as Jessica just alluded to. This solution is focused on aligning funding mechanisms and policies for youth justice and youth homelessness services to allow for more coordinated approaches to preventing youth homelessness. So right now, what we heard from people across the 4 regions was that funding for these services that youth rely on is often fragmented, short-term. I'm sure we're all used to the idea of pilot studies being the thing and forgetting them as soon as they're no longer a pilot. And policies and funding that's tied up in red tape. So something else we heard was, a youth might find a unit that they can rent, but it takes 3 business days to get that first and last month's rent from an organization, and in those 3 days, the landlord has rented it to somebody else. So that kind of red tape that gets tied up in can be a real problem in ensuring a young person is able to avoid homelessness. So if, as we know, housing is a human right, then funding should reflect that reality. But many programs are underfunded. We know that staff are not paid for the hard work that they're doing, and the eligibility rules are sometimes too narrow. So there are 6 solutions in this area, ranging from flexible funding to be able to respond to housing opportunities urgently, that what I just described, to be able to put first and last month's rent in a young person's hand right away when there's a housing unit available, to ensuring Indigenous leaders have autonomy over the funding that serves their youth. Now I'm going to drill down on solution 7, build cross-sectoral community collaboration. So next slide, please. And you can see why we are spotlighting only one solution per area. Over the 14 solutions, we have actually identified 120 pathways for change makers to enact these solutions. I think the sheer scale of the solutions and the pathways is a reflection of the complexity of the youth justice and youth homelessness sectors. But also there's lots to unpack here, and there's lots for people to do, lots of pathways that individuals can take. No one individual is going to take all 120 of them, but if each folks can take one, then we can really see action. So for this solution, for build cross-sectoral community collaboration, we see these pathways for the different change makers. So we heard in the roundtables how vital both informal and formalized relationships between service providers, institutions, and the government was. that it's often in an informal way that they provide youth with the care and the support that they need. So you know somebody, and so you call them up to try to make sure that a youth doesn't fall through the cracks. One of the strongest ways that we can better support homeless and justice-involved young people is by improving how our systems communicate and work together. These youth often have to navigate housing and health and services all at once. And when these agencies operate in silos, it can be difficult for young people to navigate these spaces. So cross-sectoral collaboration helps to ensure that youth receive consistent, informed, and timely care. And the different key actors that we've identified each have a role to play in strengthening that kind of collaboration. So at the federal level, the Youth Criminal Justice Act, the YCJA, already emphasizes multidisciplinary approaches in the act itself. So the federal government can use that framework to build stronger partnership across ministries and youth-serving sectors, especially where poverty, justice, and health overlap. For provincial and territorial governments, they can work with municipalities to give youth-serving organizations the capacity to collaborate across justice, housing, and health. They can also support the development of systems navigators that I'll talk about in just a minute. And then at the municipal level, municipalities can create ongoing opportunities for community connection. So this can be regular spaces where agencies can meet, opportunities for different agencies to share information, and how they can help facilitate a coordination of responses depending on emerging needs. They also play a role in advocating upwards to ensure these organizations have the resources required for collaboration, so they can be part of those conversations with the provincial, territorial, and federal governments. And finally, for community agencies, the frontline organizations can, and they already are for the most part, continue to strengthen the communication that they have with each other, and where possible, reduce redundancies, and really focus on youth-centered outcomes. So making that the shining star that we're all working towards, which in many cases, this is already in play. Where supported, community agencies are best positioned to provide service navigation to help young people navigate these different terrains and these different systems that need to be coordinated, but won't always talk to each other in a completely seamless way. And so this is where our solution around service navigators comes in. So with that note, we'll turn to the next slide. Please. Maybe it's because I didn't say please. I didn't mind my P's and Q's.
I promise I'm trying to change it. It just it's stalling.
That's okay.
For some reason. Like, oh.
Oh, well, that's the end. Spoiler.
There we go.
Our email addresses. No, we need to, no.
There we go. I've got it. There we go. It just all rushed at once.
One more.
Is this the next one? One more back?
There we go. Perfect.
There we go. Sorry.
That's okay. So this last, I've already alluded to, navigating these services is confusing and often exhausting. Jessica talked about this earlier as well, especially when young people are in crisis. So we put a lot of weight on these young people's shoulders, anybody's shoulders, but let alone young people's shoulders, to figure all these systems out. And it's honestly setting them up to fail. Many of these systems work in isolation with each other. So housing and justice and health and education might all be on different pages. And so it's up to the youth alone to work through this. And it's not effective and it's not fair. So this pocket of solutions focuses on building those connections between systems, communities, and the young people that they serve. We need culturally appropriate care, stronger community attachment, and service plans that reflect a particular young person and the complexity that might exist in their lives. Next slide. Now it's that one. Oh, I shouldn't, you know what? I asked too much of you. There we go. Yeah. So these are the pathways for change makers for solution. Oh, I actually don't remember the solution number off the top of my head, but solution 11. Streamline practices to reduce complexities of navigating multiple systems. So organizations need the capacity to provide strong aftercare and bridging support. I feel very strongly about this in my work with adults, again, let alone with youth. So these supports help youth maintain continuity as they move between systems and as they work towards independent living. So one of the most effective ways to streamline this is through a single point of contact approach. So creating systems navigator role that provides aftercare, outreach, and liaison services. Systems navigators help youth locate services, understand those eligibility requirements that we talked about earlier on in this presentation, fill out those forms, and stay connected to supports. So success in this area simply means that young people can get the resources that we're creating and we know they need, but to actually be able to access them without overwhelming barriers. Here again, different key actors have a role to play in this. So at the federal level, they can fund provinces, territories, and municipalities to embed systems navigator services directly into youth serving programs. They can also ensure that any funding targeted at youth justice or homelessness includes support for that navigation role within it. At the provincial and territorial level, they can work with other levels of government to build systems navigation capacity across regions, because what we also heard was, sometimes youth won't stay in one particular neighborhood or even city. And so that navigator role will in time sometimes have to cross cities, potentially even cross provinces. So creating regional navigators for youth to move between communities and provide training focused on supporting youth who are involved in multiple systems is a key provincial and territorial role. At the municipal level, municipalities can contribute by strengthening that local navigation capacity and expanding drop-in services where youth can access immediate support and guidance. And as I noted earlier on, frontline organizations and community workers can advocate for the need for service navigators, and they are the right people to implement a service navigator position. Really, the goal of this kind of systems navigator role is to reduce complexity so that young people don't have to manage coordinating their own care across different systems that don't always speak the same language or speak to one another. So streamlined practices and dedicated navigators help to ensure that young people can stay connected, supported, and move forward. Next slide. There's our emails. So this was a lot. We recognize it's a lot. It's why we didn't go through all 14 of the solutions. It's a lot of information all at once. But what we hope one of the takeaways from this presentation is that there's a recognition of all sorts of different pathways that might spark an interest to different people in this room and outside of this room to take up, regardless of which change maker you identify as. So if any of these resonate with you, again, not having to implement 120 pathways on your own, but maybe one of them is something that can spark your interest in something that you can take on. This project was developed from the principle that all people should have access to safe, truly affordable, and permanent housing. And involvement with the justice system does not preclude somebody's ability to attain housing, especially young people. This work is hard. It's hard to do this work. We heard from communities, again, across these 4 regions, how challenging this work is. But they take inspiration from the young people that they work with. As you saw in each of our slides, solution slides, we had a quote from one of our youth advisors. And so I'll leave you with this quote from one of them. They said, "We need to work extra hard to make sure they do not fall through the cracks." So any of those pathways that we can implement to avoid young people from falling through the cracks is a wonderful way forward. So as a research team, we ourselves are trying to do this as well. St. Leonard's Society of Canada is leading a CMHC-funded prototype inspired by this project entitled Pursuing Housing. And so Anita can speak to that in greater detail, but looking at using the guiding principles and some of these solutions to enact housing responses for young people who are justice involved. So I'm sure St. Leonard's will share that information with you as the project outlines, but we're trying to walk the walk as well. So we're all sort of in this together. So we do have, we took the time we wanted to take. We were excited to not have to rush for 15 minutes, but we do have still time for Q&A.
Thank you both so much for that really detailed and comprehensive. It was really nice to see it unpacked like properly and not rushed through like a 15-minute time slot. So that was really great. Thank you both. So Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions or kind of coordinate. If there's questions, if you want to raise your hand, you can put a question in the chat. We will moderate from there for the next few minutes will we have an opportunity, or we can answer questions about what the next steps are as well, or where you maybe see work in your particular space and the sector that you're representing, sort of taking a lead on any of this. So um, I'll move right into the chat. Thank you, Fallon. We appreciate your appreciation. So I'll also maybe just take a really quick moment. Erin, I know you touched on the CMHC Solutions Lab that we're initiating. So really that is about sort of validating a lot of the findings that came out of this project that Erin and Jessica have talked about today, and looking to sort of cast that net a little bit wider to see about how we can engage people to be part of just prototyping solutions. And so really what the way I like to look at it is, when we first started this work, we sort of said, yes, we know young people need housing, but there's going to be more than just the housing alone. So what are the components that are tied to that? And now that we've done a lot of that work, the next phase for us is, okay, now how do we actually put the housing in place? And now, so we're looking at existing programs that have access to units that are housing young people, and we're thinking about how to apply these solutions in a really robust way to those housing units and sort of evaluating where everything lands. So we're sort of bringing those two pieces together. And if anyone's interested in being a part of that work, it's being held entirely virtually, and I'll get the link into the chat in just a moment. But I see, Danielle, you've got a question. Probably we did ask for people to send info in advance of the webinar. So I'm gonna touch on maybe one of those to start, and we'll see where we land. So I'm not there. There was 5 questions, and I feel like we might not have time for all of them, so I'm going to pick just at my own leisure what I think might be a good question for you guys to address. So I think this is a really interesting one. It's a little bit broad, but I invite both you, Erin, and Jessica to sort of lean into this one. But how do services for youth and adults differ? Maybe we didn't necessarily touch on
Yeah.
that as much. So yeah, do you want to take that one, Erin?
Oh, Jess, do you want to?
No, yo, go for it.
Yeah, I think one of the key differences is that services for young people can and often do recognize young people at their developmental age. So when I saw this question in advance, what I initially thought of was, if people are familiar, the Housing First for Youth model. So Housing First is a model that's been used for over a decade now here in Canada, in Finland, in the United States, around providing people with housing and then wraparound supports that nobody needs to earn housing, that housing is what you provide because you have a human right, and then those supports to follow. And so for the last few years, researchers and folks at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness have been working through and piloting what Housing First for Youth looks like. So what has to change with that model for it to work for youth? And all the principles are the same. So I think that's what's not a difference between youth and adult services, is those principles should be the same. Again, housing as a human right, anti-oppression, person-centered and person choice, all of those stay the same. What is different is recognizing that young people are at a different place in their lives than adults, and not imposing that they have to take on a level of independence and a level of adulthood that no 17-year-old should have to take on. So recognizing how, human connection is important to all of us. It's especially important to young people. So how to really build in that sense of belonging and that sense of community connection into that work. And recognizing that not overbearing young people with adult type decisions when they're not adults, I think is really key. One of the other things I thought of when I saw that question is St. Leonard's Society of Canada has done such an amazing job at talking through and working through the ideas around emerging adults. And so, we're talking about young people and we're talking about adults, but actually a lot of the folks that we're talking about who are youth justice involved are in that middle, where they're not kids, but treating them like adults is not working either. And so recognizing that middle ground, that middle space for emerging adults is, I think, a key part of that question. I know Anita could speak at length about that.
Yeah, I won't speak too much at length other than to say in my opening remarks, a lot of these webinar series are grounded in the federal framework to reduce recidivism. And we also know that one of the highest cohorts within that recidivism kind of group is people aged 18 to 24, right? And so rethinking how we target supports and interventions specifically around that age range is, I think, a really important consideration. So yeah.
The only thing I wanted to add was to think about how eligibility requirements for some of these services might cut off at age 18, for example.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of facilitating perhaps people's access to supports that might, thinking about that carceral net might facilitate that. So it's interesting to think about this issue around age, the assumptions we're making about young people's abilities once they turn 19, some arbitrary number, um, to engage in adult type life and adult services in ways that they either have never been able to or are not quite there yet.
Yeah.
So I think that this point around emerging adulthood is another key way to think about this question.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we have time for one more question before we wrap up, but I'm gonna put it's hard to choose when you only have a few minutes left, but I'm gonna go with and maybe this is a question for anybody who's showed up with interest in this space, but the question we received in advance was how is technology? Oh, sorry, Nancy, do you have a question?
I was trying to find the raise hand and
I'm sorry,
I'm
just wave
struggling
your hand.
today. I know,
Go for
right?
it.
Well, I just had a question about like pre-release and release plans because I know like from the adult side of it that they say that they're doing a release plan, but it's to get a job. It's to find housing, that though all those things. And it's not making any connections in the community. So
Mhm.
how do we get in before they get out? Because that is an opportunity for us to build relationships and connections. And what do you need? You
Mhm.
know, I've lived experience and I was never asked that. So I don't imagine the youth are being asked that either. So how do we get in and how do we do some real planning for them to integrate into the community?
I think that's a really great point. And I also appreciate, Nancy, that you saved me from whatever that technology question was going to be that I probably wouldn't have known the answer to. So thank you. Yeah, I completely agree. What we kept hearing about from folks was, the youth justice system is set up in a way that I think discharge planning can happen, can and sometimes does happen in a more robust way than in the adult system, right? In the adult system, especially for people who aren't sentenced, we don't know what their release date is going to be and things like that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity with the youth system to build that out. What we heard from folks was there just isn't enough capacity to be able to do that work. The other thing we heard, I think it speaks to capacity, is there would be like a plan all set out, and then the young person would release, and people would not be there, not do what they said they were going to. Different organizations, different services weren't there to do what they needed to do on that day. And so it's about how do we make sure, part is how do we make sure organizations are accountable, but I don't know if accountability is how do we make sure they're resourced enough that they know what they want to be able to help with, and then they just can't do it on a really important day. I also think probably stigma is a part of this. And so like we know that young people who are justice involved are not always the ones that organizations want to take. And so reducing that stigma around it must be part of that story as well. But thank
For
you for
sure.
sharing what you're experiencing as well in terms of that discharge planning. It's really important to talk about.
Thanks.
Thanks, Nancy. It's a great question. I think the only other thing I would add to that is we heard a lot and we've tried to weave that into what we're doing with our next steps as well. But in terms of the importance of what many people called across the regions a warm handover, right? So just creating a warm handover. It's not just about like how you create a plan or right, but just ensuring that a warm handover takes place, right? And so that's part of again the emphasis that I think Erin articulated really well was the need for that service navigation, system navigation piece to be well thought out from a policy angle, and then resource properly to ensure that that warm handover can take place. So I know our hour is almost up, and I have a few notes I just wanted to get in before people start disappearing off my screen here. But first off is to say, if you have additional questions, the deck will be made available to everyone who's registered. You'll have access to SLSC's email and Erin and Jessica as well. If you do have questions that are burning that you want to be able to pose to them, please feel free to write to any of us. I do just want to extend my deep gratitude, not just for today, but for the years of being able to work with Erin and Jessica as colleagues on this important work. I really have so much gratitude for you. It was really nice to listen and attend our presentation without having to actually do it. So thank you so much for doing the heavy lifting on that. I'll just note we've created a post-webinar evaluation survey to help us improve future webinars. I know people always say, like, we want more time to like talk and ask questions. So we hope today there was enough time to do that. And we are going to post, I think Danielle's put that into the chat right now for you to be able to provide feedback on today's session. We are trying to do monthly webinars, but I will add the caveat that we have decided to give our team a break and actually not have one in December, under the pretense that we probably wouldn't have a great turnout anyways. And so there's no webinar for December, but we would like to wish everyone a wonderful holiday season, and we hope that you'll return with us in January with a session that's now going to really focus a little bit more on this topic, but that will unpack it a little bit more into the adult space as well. So just that intersection between housing and the justice system broadly, as it pertains to adults. So I hope you'll join us for that. We'll be looking at the barriers to stable housing, the role that housing plays in combating crime and actually reducing recidivism. And we will share more details about that webinar soon. But just if you want to scribble it down on your calendars, it's scheduled for January 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I think Danielle's put the link for that webinar in our chat as well. And we'll send a follow-up after the email with the recording, the registration link for our next webinar, and anything else you might need. But if there's something that you didn't find in the post webinar materials, please just write to us and we will be more than happy to share any relevant materials with you based on today's session. So thank you so much for your time and energy and willingness to be here on a November afternoon. I know it's a tricky time of year, so appreciate all of you for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you in January.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks, Anita.